The morning began like any other, with the smell of dark roast coffee slipping through the window and pale sunlight stretching across the desk. My screen was still booting up when the door swung open and Ethan Caldwell walked in like he was about to make history. No knock, no greeting, just 5 clipped words dropped into the air, effective immediately, down to HR. The folder hit my desk with a dull thud, rattling my coffee cup. Ethan turned on his heel and left, his swagger ridiculous, like a kid who just gave himself a medal for finishing homework on time. I didn't bother asking why. Everything had already been arranged. The press conference for the Vector Defense merger was coming up, and cleaning out the old legacy must have been on Ethan's to-do list. 17 years of work ended with 5 words. No thank you, just a printed sheet stamped with bold type. Technical Leadership Restructure. It sounded less like a strategy and more like a bad slogan for a budget cut campaign. Downstairs, HR greeted me with forced smiles, eyes avoiding mine, and hands offering paperwork. No one said, "I'm sorry," or "good luck." They'd probably been told, "She won't cause trouble." And they were right. There was no need for trouble when the system they thought they controlled had already been programmed to respond on its own. The hallway leading to the exit was lined with banners. Helios Dynamics X, Vector Defense, protecting the future with artificial intelligence. The irony stung. The font they used was one I'd chosen for the Prometheus Shield technical report. Seeing it now felt less like a promise of the future and more like an obituary for the technology itself. Outside, the September air was cold enough to keep me clear-headed. As I stepped out, my reflection on the glass doors looked like a stranger. The lightness I felt wasn't from losing a job. It was from knowing this power play had just triggered something they never saw coming. In my car, I unlocked my personal phone. The black screen lit up with familiar text. Clause 17B. Activated. A faint smile crossed my lips. Robert Nash would have appreciated this. The founder of Helios always said, "Every system needs a defense mechanism, even people." He'd built one into my contract, calling it a humanitarian failsafe. Clause 17B stated clearly, if the lead developer is terminated before the final payout, all Prometheus project access will immediately lock down. Only the original biometric owner can reopen it. And that owner is me. The city outside kept moving like nothing had changed. Traffic still pulsed through the streets, neon signs still flickered, but somewhere high above, a few people were probably celebrating saving $150 grand. They didn't know that the cut just destabilized a $300 million merger. Back home, I poured another cup of coffee and sat before my personal system. The hard drive hummed to life, blue light reflecting. Off the desk. Inside the failsafe directory, 9 files sat in silence, each one tied to Helios' main operational core. One wrong move, and the entire framework would lock itself permanently. The clock ticked steadily on the wall. Thursday. Exactly noon. The time when my performance bonus should have landed. Now it marks something else entirely. The start of a 72-hour countdown. No alarms, no alerts, just silence, steady and calm, like the breathing of a giant beast awakening. Ethan thought he'd cut out a tumor. In truth, he'd just pulled the safety pin. The clock kept ticking, each second a quiet reminder that this time, I didn't need to shout or act out of rage. I just had to let time do its work. And you, the one listening, are part of that process too. If you've ever been dismissed, underestimated, or quietly erased by those who thought they owned the game, maybe you'll understand why silence was never my option. I want to hear from you. Where are you listening from? Drop a comment below, and if you love calm, calculated revenge stories that can shake an empire, hit subscribe. Because this story has only just begun. A few years back, when Helios Dynamics was still a small startup, Robert Nash walked into our lab with that faraway look in his eyes. He stood in the middle of screens and tangled cables like a conductor listening to a symphony that hadn't yet been written. The light glinted off his glasses, splitting his face in half, one side bright, the other shadowed, like a man carrying the weight of the future on his shoulders. He never saw technology as something to sell. To him, it was a responsibility to bear. When I agreed to lead the Prometheus SHIELD team, Robert told me, "The greatest technology isn't what we build, it's what we protect." Those words blended into the hum of cooling fans and the flicker of LEDs, becoming the quiet rhythm behind every decision I made after that. One late night, between the smell of hot metal and cold coffee, he told me about Clause 17B. His voice was low and rough from cigarettes, but every word landed like iron. There will be people who try to control Prometheus without understanding it. I've seen that before in the military, when power sits in the hands of those who don't understand consequences. He had worked for the Department of Defense, where a single line of code could mean the difference between safety and catastrophe. Prometheus isn't just a product, he said. It's a national security framework. If it ever falls into the wrong hands, it won't just destroy a company, it'll shake the defense system itself. So he added Clause 17B to the contract, something only a handful of people ever knew about. If the lead developer is removed from payroll before bonuses are dispersed, all project access will be locked. Only the original biometric signature can reopen it. I remember looking at him for a long moment. "You don't trust the board, do you?" Robert smiled, a small, weary curve. "I don't trust power. I trust mechanisms." After his death, a car crash that sent the whole company reeling, the clause was forgotten. Those who came after him only cared about revenue, not principles. But I remembered. Every time I touched the Prometheus core, I could feel Robert's hand in the code. Precise, steady, uncompromising. As Helios grew, Vector Defense arrived with golden promises and a merger proposal worth hundreds of millions. Ethan's father, the real power behind the board, began pushing for optimization. Streamlining personnel, they called it, which meant cutting anything that didn't look profitable on a spreadsheet. Then came Ethan, the so-called modernizer of Helios. He looked at me with that mix of respect and unease, the kind of fear men have for things they can't control. In meetings, he talked about efficiency, restructuring, and shareholder value. All I saw was organized blindness. A month before I was fired, Ethan cornered me in the lab. "If necessary," he asked, "we can transfer Prometheus access to me, right?" I looked up from the keyboard. "Do you even know what Clause 17B is?" He frowned, lowering his voice. "Those old clauses don't matter anymore." "Then you'd better hope they stay theoretical." He gave a stiff laugh and turned away, shoulders tense. It wasn't the laugh of someone amused. It was the nervous sound of a man who didn't realize his hand was already on the detonator. Looking back now, I think that was when everything truly began. Not the day I got fired, but the day an arrogant man believed he could own someone else's legacy with a signature. From the old lab window, I still remember the city lights reflected on the ceiling like data streams across a circuit board, quiet on the surface, but alive underneath, waiting for a signal. And Robert Nash had been right all along. One day, the system would protect itself, even when people forgot how. Night settled over the city, pulling a shimmer of blinking lights from every tech tower. In the top floors of Helios, server screens began fading into red, one by one, until the room looked like a control deck sinking underwater. The Prometheus system, steady for years, had gone silent, like a giant creature curling back into the dark. I sat at my desk, watching the message appear on my private console. Secure mode engaged. Clause 17B. Active. No sound. No sirens. Just words, cold as metal. Across town, they were probably panicking. Ethan was no doubt standing in the control room, trying to hold his composure while engineers around him hammered at their keyboards, desperate to break back in. I could picture it perfectly, the LED lights flashing, keystrokes clattering, Ethan's face flushing red every time another command failed. He could pretend to understand the system, but he'd never outsmart something built by people who believed in discipline and loyalty, two things he'd never learned. My phone buzzed. A message from Chris, one of my old engineers. "They're blaming me. I didn't touch anything." I typed back quickly. "Stay quiet. Don't interfere. The system's defending itself." Chris was one of the few who understood Prometheus almost as deeply as I did. He once asked why I never used open source backups. I'd told him, because what no one can touch stays truly safe. Now he understood. Another alert appeared on my screen. Node 34, disconnected. Authorization suspended. Helios had just lost part of its National Defense Corps. Every Prometheus node was like a vein in the system's body, and one by one they were shutting down. The beauty of it was, no one but me could bring them back. Meanwhile, on the 13th floor, Ethan was shouting over the chaos. Use high-level admin override. We need to regain control now. Chris stood near the corner, shaking his head. He knew that would only make things worse. A young engineer tried anyway. He typed the override command. The screen instantly went black. Then white letters appeared in an old system font. Unauthorized attempt detected. The next action will trigger a permanent shutdown. The room went dead silent. The hum of the air conditioner was the only sound left. Ethan swallowed hard. Sweat traced a slow line down his temple, glinting under the fluorescent lights. Who the hell wrote this code? He demanded, voice breaking. Chris answered softly. Robert Nash and Elena. My name hung in the air like a blade. Around 10 that night, I accessed the shadow layer, the hidden monitoring code designed to observe system behavior without detection. The readings flickered wildly, like the heart rate of a patient on life support. I knew Helios would try a reboot by morning, maybe even bring in an outside hacker, but they didn't understand what Prometheus had become. It learned user patterns. Any foreign attempt would be flagged as a permanent threat. And once that happened, not even I could bring it back. My phone rang again, a video call. Chris. His face filled the screen, the glare from his monitor reflecting in his eyes. They're talking about calling Vector. They're going to report that you sabotaged the system. I know, I said calmly. What are you going to do? Nothing. Let them talk. Everything's already recorded. Chris hesitated. Elena, is that clause even legal? A faint smile. Nash never wrote anything a court couldn't prove. After the call ended, I leaned back in my chair. The desk lamp caught the edge of a photo frame. Robert Nash, standing with me and the Prometheus team at our first system launch. His hand rested on my shoulder, his expression calm but unyielding. Back then, I didn't understand that look. Now I did. He'd known this day would come. Outside, wind rustled through the trees along the boulevard, steady and rhythmic, like the ticking of a countdown. I looked back at the monitor. The words glowed sharp and unblinking. 56 hours remaining. In less than 3 days, the $300 million merger would have to prove that they still owned Prometheus. But when that clock hit zero, the proof would vanish. Legally, cleanly, irreversibly. Ethan thought he'd saved money by cutting a bonus. He didn't realize he'd just signed away Helios's future. The next morning, Helios officially went into crisis mode. Internal reports leaked, departments whispered, and the media began to sniff out the story. Headlines appeared on finance pages. Helios Dynamics faces system failure during merger with Vector Defense. Technical glitch or internal conflict. I sat in my small kitchen, sipping coffee, watching the news replay footage of Ethan stepping out of the Helios building, eyes dodging cameras, lips moving in a blur no one could decipher. A subtitle read, "Sources suggest the issue may be linked to the recent termination of the Prometheus project lead." I almost laughed. They couldn't say my name publicly. It would mean admitting the person they fired was the one holding the system together. My phone lit up. Unknown number. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Elena? The voice was low, steady, and professional. This is Randall Pierce, legal counsel for Vector Defense. I stayed silent, letting him take the lead. We've been notified of a critical issue at Helios, he said. It appears system access for Prometheus has been suspended. Appears? I said, smiling faintly. That's a polite way of saying it's completely locked. Randall didn't laugh. You understand what this means for the merger? I do. And I also understand Clause 14 of the merger agreement, the key personnel provision. A sharp exhale came through the line. He knew I was right. If one of the three senior developers leaves before the merger closes, I continued, Vector reserves the right to reevaluate, delay, or withdraw entirely. And you're one of those three, Randall said quietly. That's correct. And as of now, I'm no longer with Helios. Silence. Then his tone shifted, cautious. In that case, the deal is facing serious legal exposure. I'd say so. I took another sip of coffee, calm as ever. You know, I once told them Prometheus isn't just a system, it's a pact of trust, and they broke it. The call ended. I opened my laptop and accessed the encrypted server logs. The countdown displayed clearly 47 hours and 19 minutes remaining. Below it, rows of failed login attempts from Helios. They were trying to spoof my credentials, but the system was too intelligent. Each attempt only tightened another layer of encryption. They'd built their own trap. Later that afternoon, Chris called. They just held an emergency meeting. Ethan says he's bringing in a crisis response team. I heard they're hiring outside hackers. Let's see how far they get, I said. Aren't you worried they'll blame you? They already have. The rest is about who has the stronger evidence. Chris exhaled through the receiver. Ethan's falling apart. He's lost control. Vector's pressuring him. The board's demanding answers. Stay quiet, Chris. Don't get dragged in. Just document everything. Meetings, messages, all of it. See, he hesitated. Where do you think this ends? Exactly where it's supposed to, I said. When night came, I looked out at the city lights. Somewhere in one of those glass towers, Ethan was running between boardrooms, trying to save what he never understood. And strangely, I didn't feel triumphant. Just an odd, still calm, as if everything was unfolding exactly the way Robert Nash had predicted. A new notification popped up in the corner of my screen. Vector Defense, Legal Inquiry, Ownership Verification Request. I opened it. The message was brief. Please provide documentation verifying legal ownership of Prometheus. It wasn't sent by mistake. They'd sent it directly to me. I leaned back, took a slow breath. This moment wasn't just the consequence of Ethan's arrogance. It was the proof that in the end, everything circles back to the one who truly understands the system, the one who built it. Under the warm light of my small apartment, I opened the secure archive. The document appeared on screen, the cursor gliding slowly across the title, Intellectual Property Custodianship, Elena Torres. And only then did I allow myself to smile. Not because I'd won, but because justice was finally running exactly as it should. The next morning, Helios officially entered crisis mode. Internal reports leaked, departments buzzed with whispers, and the media started to catch the scent of something wrong. A headline flashed across the financial pages. Helios Dynamics faces major disruption during merger with Vector Defense. Technical failure or internal conflict? I sat in my small kitchen, sipping coffee, watching the news play on the screen. The broadcast replayed footage of Ethan stepping out of Helios headquarters, eyes dodging the cameras, lips moving in a blur of words no one could make out. A caption ran across the bottom. Sources suggest the issue may be linked to the termination of the Prometheus project lead. I almost laughed. They couldn't say my name. Doing so would be the same as admitting their mistake. The phone lit up, an internal number. Thank you for coming, Ethan said hoarsely as I stepped into the conference room on the 20th floor. No greeting, no pleasantries, just silence. The lights reflected off a long wooden table, polished so smooth it mirrored the tension hanging in the air. He sat at the head of the table, jacket slightly wrinkled, tie loosened. Two board members flanked him, with a young attorney scribbling notes beside them. The room felt heavy, as if an explosion had gone off here and everyone was pretending it hadn't. I didn't think I had much of a choice, I said, pulling out a chair. Ethan didn't answer. His gaze flicked to the coffee cup on the table, then drifted toward the window. His right hand trembled. The glass of water beside him tipped slightly, a few drops spilling across the wood, tracing the grain like thin veins. He didn't wipe it, didn't even notice. For the first time, the constant confidence was gone from his face. What replaced it was exhaustion. The kind that comes from trying to hold together something that's already collapsing while pretending you're still in control. Elena, he said finally, his voice struggling to stay steady. You know what this means for the company. Vector's threatening to pull out. The stock dropped 20% in 2 days. We need the system back, and only you can do it. Only I'm authorized to do it, I corrected. That's a big difference, Ethan. The lawyer coughed lightly, trying to break the tension, but Ethan lifted a hand to silence him. We're prepared to renegotiate, he said. Your bonus, a consulting contract, whatever you want. You think this is about money? Then what do you want? I met his eyes. I want Helios to stop treating the people who built its technology like they're disposable. I want Prometheus to exist for what it was meant to be, not as a line item to please shareholders. I want you just once to understand that technology isn't made to serve greed. Ethan said nothing. His hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white, sweat forming on his forehead. I watched him, and, in that fleeting moment, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Only pity remained. What he'd tried to control was never Prometheus. It was his own fear of fading beneath someone else's shadow. One of the board members leaned forward, voice sharp. Are you threatening to extort the company, Ms. Torres? I raised an eyebrow, calm. If protecting intellectual property from people willing to sell it to Vector counts as extortion, maybe you've never actually read the contracts you sign. Ethan slammed his palm on the table, the sound cracking through the air. We don't have time for this power play, Elena. In less than 48 hours, this deal collapses. Exactly, I said quietly. And you're the one who started the countdown. He pushed back his chair and walked to the window. The city below glowed in the glass, his reflection fractured by the light, like a man trying to find himself in a world that no longer believed him. His voice broke, low and strained. You don't understand. I have to prove to them I'm capable, that I can save Helios. I do understand, I said softly. But you forgot the most important truth. No one can save something they don't respect. The silence that followed was suffocating. Finally, Ethan turned, his tone lower now. If I agree to your terms, can you restore the system? I can, I said, but I'll only do it once I'm certain Prometheus won't be abused again. You don't have to trust me, Ethan. Just trust what Robert Nash believed in, that mechanisms are fairer than people. I stood and reached for my coat. I'll wait for the board's response, before noon tomorrow. After that, the system locks permanently. As I left, the door shut behind me with a sharp, final click. In the long hallway, I paused, listening to the wind whistling through the glass seams, a low, restless sound carrying the pulse of a city that moved too fast to care. Somewhere behind me, Ethan was probably still standing there, realizing he hadn't just lost control of a system. He'd lost the last chance to earn respect. In the elevator, my phone buzzed. A new message from Randall Pierce, Vector's lawyer. We'd like a private meeting. Without Helios. I stared at the text for a long time. Part of me already knew. This game wasn't over yet, and this time the final move was mine. The meeting was arranged suspiciously fast. One message from Randall Pierce, Vector Defense's legal counsel. Tonight, 11 p.m., 34th floor, no Helios. I didn't reply. I just let the message sit in my inbox for hours. The truth was, I already knew I'd go. Not out of curiosity, but instinct. When a $300 million company falls into chaos, the first person who asks to speak privately rarely just wants to talk. The Vector building stood in downtown Washington, its glass panels catching the city lights like polished steel. I arrived a few minutes early. The security guard handed me a visitor's badge without asking for ID. He'd been told to expect me. The conference room on the 34th floor was smaller than I imagined. Soft lighting, one long table, 2 glasses of water already poured. Randall Pierce was waiting. His gray suit was crisp, but the loosened tie and faint shadows under his eyes made him look like a man who hadn't slept properly in days. Elena, he said, rising to shake my hand. Thank you for coming. I know this is unconventional. Unconventional is the only thing that's made sense this week, I said, taking a seat. Randall opened his briefcase and slid out a thick folder. You know why I wanted to meet. Vector's in a difficult position. Helios claims you're withholding the Prometheus source code. They've even provided internal emails accusing you of a security breach. How adorable, I said. 3 days ago, they called it a personnel restructure. Now it's a breach. He didn't laugh. Instead, he flipped through the folder, revealing pages of the merger contract. Clause 17B. I read it. I have to say, whoever wrote that, Robert Nash, knew exactly how to leave a legacy. I nodded slightly. He didn't believe in promises. He believed in mechanisms. Randall leaned back in his chair. I'll be direct. Vector doesn't want to terminate the merger, but they can't proceed unless Helios proves legal ownership. If you really are the only person who can unlock Prometheus, Vector wants to negotiate directly, with you, not the company. Directly? I asked. Directly and independently, an exclusive cooperation agreement. You keep all your rights. Vector gets to continue developing Prometheus. I studied him for a long moment. You mean they're ready to drop Helios? Randall didn't answer right away. The light caught his glasses, hiding his eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, measured. They just want the person who truly controls the technology, and clearly, Helios no longer has that person. Silence filled the room. On the 34th floor, the only sound was the steady ticking of a clock. I knew this wasn't about partnership. Vector wanted ownership through a cleaner, quieter door. I know they can offer 10 times the bonus you lost, Randall said, but this isn't about money. I've seen how you protect your work, how you forced Helios to confront what they became. People like you are rare, Elena. I rested my elbows on the table. I'm not here to make them reflect. I'm here to make them learn. And Vector? He asked. Vector knows exactly what they're buying. But I'm not selling Robert Nash's legacy to anyone. If they want Prometheus, they'll commit to protecting its principles, on paper, with signatures, and under my supervision. Randall studied me, then smiled faintly. You're not as simple as Helios thought. Helios never understood me, I said. They thought I just wrote code. They forgot I also read contracts. He nodded slowly, closing the folder. I'll relay that. But I have to ask, do you plan to return to Helios? No, I said. And if they're smart, they won't ask again. By the time I stepped out of the building, my watch read 12:43 a.m. The aviation lights above blinked red against the sky, like the city's heartbeat. A cold wind swept past, carrying that familiar mix of release and caution. Helios was falling apart. Vector was opening its doors. But deep down, I knew every new deal was just the beginning of another game. One where the side that believes it's winning is usually the first to lose. On my phone screen, the same message pulsed softly in the dark, 36 hours remaining. And this time, I wasn't just watching the clock. I was the one controlling it. The morning after I met with Randall, the sky hung thick with fog. I sat by the window, watching the city wake slowly, its outlines blurred and gray. In my mind, the ticking from the night before still echoed, each second sharp, precise, merciless. When I opened my laptop, the inbox was flooded. Over 20 new emails from Helios addresses, most with the same subject line. Request for immediate contact. I didn't need to read them. I already knew. Helios had found out about the meeting with Vector, and Ethan was definitely losing his mind. My phone rang. Chris. You've heard, right? His voice was rushed. I can guess, I said. Ethan's been in a board meeting all morning. Someone at Vector leaked it. They're saying you're plotting to hand Prometheus over. How ironic, I said dryly. 3 days ago, I was no longer essential. Now I'm a national threat. Chris exhaled hard. They're preparing to freeze your accounts, maybe even involve federal legal counsel. Let them try, I said evenly. Prometheus isn't on their servers anymore. They're just trying to lock their own shadow. After the call, I reopened my encrypted system. Everything was stable. The Prometheus files were still in deep sleep mode, uncopyable, unreachable. The words ownership pending glowed across the interface, a quiet challenge to anyone foolish enough to interfere. By noon, the headlines exploded. Helios under federal review for possible defense data breach. Sources cite internal conflict between engineering and executive teams. Beneath it was a photo of Ethan, eyes sunken, pretending composure before a wall of microphones. I stared at him on the screen and felt nothing. No triumph, just an empty kind of silence. Around 2 p.m., Randall texted, "They know about the meeting. Vector may pause the merger, but they still want a private arrangement with you. Be careful, Helios has hired an external security firm to trace the leak." He didn't need to warn me, but the way he phrased it told me he was starting to worry for himself, too. That night, another call came in, an unknown number, a low male voice, deliberate, measured. "Elena Torres? This is she. I'm calling from Helios Internal Investigations. We have a few questions about your unauthorized contact with Vector." "Unauthorized?" I repeated. "I'm not under Helios's authority anymore." "Legally, you're still bound by post-contract confidentiality." "Is that so?" I said lightly, then hung up. I wasn't afraid. It was a tactic I'd seen 100 times from the inside. When an organization loses control, the first thing it does is try to make someone else afraid. Around 9 that evening, a message came from Chris. "They found the secondary server. Ethan's trying to access the root code again." I read the text and didn't reply. A minute later, my system lit up with a warning. "Unauthorized access detected." Exactly as expected. The alert flashed on my screen. "Intrusion detected. Node 3 lockdown initiated." In under 3 minutes, the entire Prometheus network sealed itself into final defense mode. Every Helios connection severed. In the data center, the servers would have gone dark one by one, red lights flooding the room like fire alarms. Somewhere inside that chaos, Ethan was probably shouting orders, desperate. What he didn't realize was that the harder he tried, the stronger Prometheus became. Nash built it to survive every kind of attack, and tonight it was doing just that. Near midnight, an automatic email arrived from a Helios internal address. No sender, no subject, just a single line. "You can't protect what you don't understand." I stared at the words for a few seconds. It was impossible to tell whether they came from the system itself or a desperate human trying to shake my resolve. Either way, I didn't respond. Outside, rain began to fall, heavy drops striking the metal balcony, tapping in a steady rhythm. I sat still, eyes fixed on the countdown clock. 24 hours remaining. One final day. After that, ownership would automatically transfer to the original biometric holder, me. Somewhere out there, Ethan was still clawing for redemption. Vector was likely debating whether to cut Helios loose and start over, with me. How ironic. 3 days ago, they'd labeled me expendable. Now both sides were gambling their future on a clause they'd never bothered to read. Robert Nash once said, "Technology never betrays anyone. Only people betray technology." I understood that better than ever. Tonight, Helios was betraying itself. And Prometheus was doing exactly what it was built to do, protect itself from those who never deserved it. That morning, the sky hung heavy and gray, like it might snow in the middle of autumn. I brewed coffee, not because I needed caffeine, but because the ritual steadied me before the world began to shake. 24 hours left. On the screen, the countdown glowed, 23:59:12. Prometheus sat silent, as if waiting for its final command. The morning news overflowed with Helios headlines. The stock had dropped, another 12%. Vector announced it was temporarily suspending all merger activities pending verification of technology ownership. On TV, Ethan appeared at an emergency press conference, his face stiff, voice trembling beneath a mask of certainty. "Helios maintains full control of Prometheus," he said. "There are no security risks." A blatant lie, and in less than an hour, everyone would know it. My phone buzzed. A message from Chris. "They're trying a manual reboot, forcing all servers into physical access mode. Looks like Ethan's desperate." I closed my eyes. Manual mode, the last resort. It bypassed every security layer, giving direct access to the core. But once engaged, Prometheus would activate its self-destruct protocol. There would be no coming back. I typed a few commands, opening the remote dashboard. Red dots began to spread across the data map, each one a failing node, leading into the next. Then a single line appeared. Intrusion detected, terminal lockdown in progress. Ethan had just signed the death warrant for his own system. I stood, put on my coat, and left the apartment. I didn't need to sit there and watch the clock run down. Some things are better heard from a distance than witnessed up close. By late morning, Chris called again, his voice trembling. Prometheus is gone. Everything, data, backups, the mirrors, it's all wiped. Ethan smashed a monitor. Vector's out. The board's in emergency session. I know, I said quietly. They just got the notice from the Defense Cyber Authority. What notice? That Helios forfeited ownership of Prometheus the moment they violated Clause 17b. He fell silent, then whispered, "You did this for revenge?" I smiled faintly, even though he couldn't see it. No. I just let the system do what it was built to do. Robert Nash called it systemic justice. By afternoon, the headlines confirmed it. Vector Defense withdraws $300 million merger after legal breach over Prometheus ownership. Helios shares plunge 31%. Board suspends CEO Ethan Caldwell. Everything unfolded exactly as I'd predicted, but there was no thrill, no satisfaction, only a deep exhaustion, like finishing an equation 17 years in the making. Toward evening, Randall Pierce called. "Elena, Prometheus is now officially yours. Vector wants to propose a new partnership, independent, separate from Helios." I looked out the window. The city was still loud, still chasing meaningless races. "I'll consider it," I said, "but only if they guarantee one thing. Prometheus can never be used as a weapon or for profit. It was built to protect, not to control." He hesitated. "Can you really trust them to keep that promise?" "No," I replied, "but they know I can shut it down forever if they don't." That night, as the sun slipped behind the skyline, I sat back at my desk. The monitor glowed softly, the text shifting from ownership pending to transfer complete. Beneath it, a single confirmation line. Registered owner, Elena Torres. No more Helios, no more Vector. Just me, and the legacy of Robert Nash. In my inbox, a new email appeared. No subject. Sender, Ethan Caldwell. 4 words. "You were right, always." I read it twice, then leaned back in my chair. Part of me wanted to call him, not to forgive, but to say it didn't have to end like this. But then I remembered Robert Nash's eyes the day we signed the contract. Calm, certain, unregretful. I closed the phone and set it on the desk. Some lessons lose their meaning when spoken aloud, and silence is sometimes the last act of respect left to give. Outside, the evening rain began to fall, washing the dust from the glass. I touched the keyboard once more and turned off the screen. The soft click echoed through the dark room. Prometheus was free. Helios had fallen. And I, at last, was free too. A week after the merger collapsed, I left Washington. No press conference, no goodbyes, just a suitcase, a few folders, and a hard drive holding the final version of Prometheus. The plane took off at dawn. The city shrank beneath me, golden lights fading slowly from the sky as if reluctant to let me go. But I was ready. I went to Montana, the place Robert Nash once said he'd retire to if he ever stopped being an engineer. Somewhere without Wi-Fi, he used to joke, so I can finally hear what silence sounds like. The cabin sat by a still lake, surrounded by pine and a thin layer of snow that floated on the surface like frost on glass. I set up a small desk by the window, opened my laptop, and watched the words appear on screen. System in sleep mode. Then I shut it down. Not because I feared anyone taking it anymore, but because Prometheus no longer needed protecting. For the first few days, I kept the routine. Woke early, brewed coffee, read the news. Helios had officially filed for bankruptcy restructuring. Ethan resigned. The board was under investigation. Vector stayed silent. And buried among the chaos was one quiet line in the financial pages. The Prometheus system has been confirmed as the sole property of engineer Elena Torres, former lead of the Helios development team. No more disputes, no more phone calls. The story had ended, like a small footnote in history. That afternoon, I walked along the edge of the lake. The water was still, reflecting a sky so clear I could see the clouds drifting through it. I thought of Robert Nash, of the nights he sat at his desk, writing code and talking about faith in a world obsessed with selling everything it touched. He once told me, Elena, one day they'll try to take everything you build, but they can never take the reason you built it. Now I understand. Technology was never just about code, it was about people, about trust, loyalty, and the quiet respect for the work itself. As the sun sank low, I sat on the porch, the air carrying the scent of pine and lake mist. The calm that filled me wasn't triumph, it was peace, the kind that comes only after doing what's right, even when no one's watching. My phone buzzed, a message from Chris. Helios is gone. Vector wants to partner directly. They're asking if you'll return to the market. I looked at the screen, smiled faintly, and set the phone face down. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to answer. The next morning, I rode to the middle of the lake. The water was cold and still. In my hand was an old USB drive, the first backup of Prometheus, the one Ethan once thought was the key. I tossed it into the water. It sank fast, leaving no ripple behind. In that moment, I realized, to truly win, you don't have to keep everything. You just have to know when to let go. The sun dipped lower, painting the lake in orange light. I looked up and whispered, as if to Robert, we did the right thing. Not for them, for us. A breeze passed over the water, breaking the surface in soft ripples. It felt like a nod. Prometheus would sleep in peace, untouched, uncorrupted, and I, finally, was allowed to just be Elena Torres. A woman no longer defined by systems or contracts, just a person who no longer needed to prove her worth in a world that measures everything by profit. As the last light faded behind the mountains, I thought of it all. The 72 hours, the $300 million, the forgotten clause, and the lesson Ethan was probably only now beginning to grasp. Respect isn't something you're given, it's something you earn, line by line. The sun slipped behind the mountains, its last light dissolving across the still surface of the lake. I stood there, watching the ripples fade where the USB had disappeared beneath the water. No more anger, no more fear, nothing left to prove, only silence, pure and real, the kind I'd spent years trading pieces of myself to find again. Prometheus would rest in peace, and I, finally, was free to live as a person, not a symbol. You know, maybe all of us reach a point where we have to let something go just to hold on to who we are. I wonder, what would you do if you were standing at that choice? Which moment in this story spoke to you most? The one where I stayed silent, or the one where I walked away? Share your thoughts below. I read every comment. And if you want to hear more stories where justice isn't won by power, but by intellect and quiet resolve, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Thank you for listening and for walking with me all the way to the end of this journey.